A question about how do we manage this tension between wanting to rebuild quickly versus understanding the risk and then planning for it? And I'll throw that out to the panel to answer that question like that.
Pretty quickly versus carefully. Can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, that's a really tough question. It's a great question. We've seen New York State say, you know, we've got 8 months to plan before we really start spending our federal dollars at the community level. And it's too late for New Jersey to do that now. And there is a sense of deadlines for spending the federal money, but you know, it's never too late to start. This is, I think Chris Daggett said this morning that Tim Dillingham said this is a generational issue. And so here we are today, and the question really is, you know, what can we start doing now?
I think my answer, and it is a hard question, we've a group of partners that work on these thinking ahead, planning for the future kind of questions we've wrestled with. In the past year, community leaders just needed to get their residents back into their homes, and they could only think about rebuilding their tax base or making sure they didn't lose more of it. And so some of those basic needs kind of need to be met before they're willing to think bigger than that. And I think that's important to recognize that. And I think it goes to the point of some of our other panelists where sometimes there's just basic things that have to happen, and then you can allow yourself the time. And that, I'm hoping that time is now where we can step back and say, wait a minute, there's something bigger here, and we need to work on that.
So I called one of my colleagues last night, and I said, look, I'm going to present at the conference today, and you know, I've said this before, but I know I'll be saying to more people, different crowds today. So I said, what I'm going to say is that in communities with high level of cumulative impacts, we need to have a cumulative impact strategy in place before we rebuild. And I said, is that reasonable? Will that take too long, given everybody wants to rebuild fast? And you know, the answer I got back, and I guess is how the environmental justice community feels, and Pete, you said it, and I meant to say it, but didn't, is that if we rush to rebuild and use the business as usual model, we're going to perpetuate or exacerbate inequities that we worry about in the environmental justice community. Because the system produced those inequities in the first place. So if you go back to the same system, it's unreasonable to think it's really going to change much. So my answer to the tension is that you certainly have to take care of people's immediate needs, like we're doing here. And then the other of those kind of judgment call. Have you taken care of people's immediate needs? Do you need to rebuild so quickly that you're going to reinforce some things that that are going wrong already? And so, you know, I would say I understand we have to rebuild, but again, let's not miss the opportunity to do things better.
All right, very good. Here is, these two questions are related, so I'm going to read them both and you'll see why they're related. How can we make sure that people who are low income or of color are included in all conversations about recovery and resiliency? And then the second one is, as the FEMA map lines move, some individuals in lower socioeconomic communities will no longer be eligible for insurance that they had before. How do we assist those individuals who don't have the resources to move or self-insure? So I leave those two questions out there.
So the first one's a question, you know, that we struggle with all. I mean, in the environmental justice community, that's kind of our goal, right? That's one of our basic principles. That how do we involve communities of color and low-income communities in the discussions? And listen, we struggle with it all the time. But we have groups that are on the ground, and we have a presence in the community. You know, we go to hearings, we meet with the community, we try to support the community. And I think one thing, though, one point I want to make, and I made it during my presentation, is that what we see when, for example, you know, I don't want to be too specific. We saw a government report and it said they'd done community outreach. And we thought, wow, I guess we're not part of the community because no one outreached to us. And we saw this also. We've been part of a regional effort with the New Jersey environmental justice community, with the New York environmental justice community. And we've come together and we've issued some recommendations, and we've been meeting with government officials on the federal level at least. And we found that when they talk about community, they talk about municipal level. And I think we're missing each other there. So I think in New Jersey, we need to have community level meetings. The government needs to get out there in the community and not talk to just municipalities. Right? It needs to have community level meetings and a lot of them, and it needs to reach out to community groups. And it needs to spend a lot of time doing this.
My answer to that would be giving the people a voice, giving them a place to come and gather and get their thoughts together, and then bringing it to the attention of the higher-ups. I've had many opportunities of doing that, and I live in the middle of the lower class income. I've gone and handed a petition to the Sandy Task Relief Force in March. I was able to speak with the governor probably about a dozen times, to where now he saw me at a public forum and goes, "Hi, Alyssa." I'm like, "Hi." Didn't know if I was in trouble or not, but he knew who I was, and you know, that's really it. So Occupy Sandy, New Jersey gave me a voice. Before that, I wouldn't speak about anything, and now they can't shut me up. So I think it's about empowering people, letting them know that they can get the help and there are resources out there.
I'd also like to add one other component of that, which is also information. We still seem to be lacking a lot of information on who was impacted and how severely were people impacted. And so without that information, it becomes very difficult to really be able to say, how are we doing? So I think there's a challenge to a lot of leaders out there to make sure we have good information as well as good opportunities to participate as we go forward. We're going to continue along the same theme here. Nikki had directly challenged us not to just plan for rebuilding, but to address the broader challenges facing EJ communities. Are there places where this is happening? What needs to occur to make it happen? I guess the question for the panel is, are we seeing places where things are happening, where there is inclusion, where we are seeing some progress being made?
I hope we're making progress every day. Hopefully we're doing the right thing.
I'm trying to think. I don't see it happening on the kind of scale we're talking about. I mean, I don't yet see. I see people thinking about this issue a lot and talking about it. And when I say issue, how do you plan to protect these communities? But I don't see a lot of it done yet. And I think what it's going to take is that, you know, some communities are starting to do it themselves. The Ironbound community is starting to do it. We have some of the Ironbound community in our AJ Alliance in the back. And some communities in New York are starting to prepare these community level adaptation plans and thinking about how it plugs into the larger economy. So I think right now we're right at the thinking stage. And I think, and hopefully it's bubbling up from the bottom and getting to the planners and getting to government and getting to people that have resources that can help give some of those resources to communities and you know, keep the thought process going and then finally implement some of these plans.
Another question is, how can technology be used to better connect people to resources both during and after disasters? I think everyone has some technological connection here.
I mean, I think during this storm, maybe more than others, we saw how important social media became, which is, you know, I don't even know that it was that popular during Katrina. I don't think it was. So that's something that has completely revolutionized municipal emergency management, the way the state communicates, the Red Cross. You saw that people said we need volunteers or donations of X, Y, and Z here, and an hour later they were inundated with stuff because, so I think in a way that kind of technology is critical to the way we move forward and communicate about these kind of things into the future.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember the storm now and to put into place in hazard mitigation plans, for example. That's part of what they're about, is thinking ahead. Okay, so we know how it worked during Sandy, or how it didn't work. What kind of, you know, structures can we put in place? What kind of social media protocols or whatever, so that we're ready next time? And that it's easy to kind of relax now that the weather's good, but we need to We need to get those things in place. Another kind of technology that's important is just like knowing where water and sewer lines are. You know, we all think government knows where those pipes are, but in fact they don't. And so getting that GIS information collected is important.
Okay. Alyssa, these are questions that are sort of relevant to you in particular. You had said that Occupy Sandy was there when the Salvation Army or United Way, others were not. And the question is, where did you get the materials, you know, if these other groups weren't there? And how were you able to, how would you suggest other communities sort of self-organize when those resources aren't there?
Talking to every single person you know. Facebook was a very popular one. We did get to hook up with the United Way as they were closing their warehouse. We did get to empty out the governor's warehouse to do our giveaway in March. And the main thing is the awareness. Union Beach is 30 seconds up our bay in the Raritan Bay, but they got a lot of attention, and yet statistically, Keansburg suffered more damage than Union Beach. And I didn't know that until I started talking about it and asking questions and putting the word out there. Facebook is an amazing thing, because I don't know about that Twitter stuff or any of the other things. The live stream, it's all foreign to me, but I'm learning about it very quickly. My organizers help me in that aspect. They put the word out and they get it that we get the supplies we need. Sometimes it's as simple as sending out a mass text message to people who love and support me and saying, hey, I need your help. And that it gets around.
Speaking of technology, if you're out there, you can send us questions via email and Twitter. Email is csdforum@ucsusa.org, and we're using hashtag #PostSandy on Twitter. Listen, another question for you, and I think this is one you may very much want to answer. If your organization had lots more money, what would you do with it? I don't see like a phone number here.
I was going to say, who's got money out there? If we have more money, I would definitely use it to structure programs to educate the community, make it that we are resilient and ready for the next disaster. Keansburg has been affected by Irene as well as Sandy. I say always that I was a victim of Sandy, but I was a survivor. A victim of Irene, but a survivor of Sandy. I learned all the valuable lessons by losing literally everything that I owned on this planet in Irene. And I had to rebuild from nothing. I was told by a FEMA representative in Irene to get rid of my pets because you don't need them. They didn't know me very well because he's like a lifeline for me. And it's the hard questions and the hard asks. I would use it for programming and educating people and making it that there is a more sustainable environment to make sure that my dreams and my hopes that I've been building for the past year are going to be consistent and stay in the community for the entire time. I don't want it to just be a Sandy story. I want it to be that when something happens in my community, they know where they can turn. And that's what I would use it for.
All right. Chris had mentioned a very compelling 3-step planning process: reinforce, rebuild, retreat, based on existing land uses. How is this to be implemented, and who decides how this is done?
I'll start. So it's a little complicated. There's no grand strategy. The Army Corps of Engineers is coming up with a plan for the protective systems for New Jersey, and the state is investing in a university consortium to try to influence that. So, you know, where do we, but meanwhile towns are moving ahead on their own, but that addresses things like dunes and seawalls and things like that. And to be honest, I'm less familiar with how those decisions get made than I am with the rebuilding, the elevation. So I think, you know, we've all heard a lot about those. If you're in an A or B zone and you have a mortgage, you have to elevate. If you don't, it's your choice. And generally, you know, communities, I guess, could theoretically prevent rebuilding, but I don't think anyone has. So that could be regulated by the town or the state, but it's not allowed. And then retreat is The state of New Jersey runs the Blue Acres buyout program funded with federal dollars. They're targeting communities that have contiguous areas where most of the homeowners are interested in selling and where the mayor's on board. And there's no like master list, or there's no program. You can't go online to see it. You can read about it in the paper. So it's, again, there's no strategy. I mean, what we'd really like to see is a map of the sort of vulnerable areas in New Jersey. I mean, the information is available to show which properties have suffered severe loss or severe repetitive loss. So which ones have suffered losses more than once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Which ones have had flood insurance claims. And then layer on top of that, you know, where will these properties be in, you know, say 30 years in terms of sea level rise and vulnerability to future storms. So if you took all of that data, you could really be strategic about targeting where you spend these dollars. There's not enough buyout dollars to buy out all the really vulnerable areas, but if we know where they are, we can start to plan. And you know, that planning can happen at the state level and the community level. I think if there was a coastal commission, that would be a great job for them to look at all the data that's out there and come up with the framework of a strategy with room for municipal involvement and community input. I mean, it's a very emotional thing if you have a vulnerable property, but knowing what the future holds and then coming up with a transition plan is probably better than, you know, learning the hard way.
Thank you. Well, actually.
All right. Related, you mentioned a coastal commission, and the idea of a coastal commission is to think regionally. Are we seeing, or are you seeing any examples of regional responses to this, whether it be planning or other?
I haven't seen a whole lot of that yet.
Would you like to?
I think that the first panel talked a little bit about home rule and how important that is in New Jersey. So in some ways it makes regional planning a little more difficult because you don't have to take your neighbor into consideration when you're making decisions. It's smart too. It benefits everybody to do that, but you know, I haven't seen a whole lot of it. It's going to come down to money eventually, I think, and shared services and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I'll just say the examples in New Jersey that we have of regional planning have really been led by the state and in some cases the federal government, where there was some kind of threat to the region, like, you know, an unwanted airstrip in the Highlands, or recognition about the vulnerability of water supplies in the Highlands, or these like landfills that were burning all over the Meadowlands, where the state said this can't go on. These individual towns acting alone can't manage this, so let's step in and create a regional framework. And towns are always concerned when that happens, but I think the Meadowlands towns are, you know, it's just the way of life. In the Pinelands, I think sometimes the mayors like to point to the state as the bad guy, but secretly it makes their towns more successful. But you need state leadership.
Well, this is a corollary to that one, but would municipal consolidation make planning easier to actually be implemented? These are some easy questions.
I don't know if I want to be the mayor from Union Beach to Seabright, that's for darn sure. I know doing relief work was hard enough. I couldn't imagine being one person in charge of that.
Pete, can I respond? I'm thinking I'm a question behind. Can I comment on
You can't ask me a question.
You know, you talk about people say we need a coastal commission. I think we need a commission to look into what I said and actually what you said, to look into what happened to communities of color and poor communities during the storm, and to think those issues through, and to go talk to, you know, to these communities that were affected. Because I think these communities are getting kind of lost in all the activity, all the necessary activity. And I think that commission, you know, needs to have a lot of people from grassroots organizations on it that are helping people, and from the environmental justice community. And I think it needs to be statewide.
Okay. Here's another question. It sounds like part of a hazard mitigation plan or an emergency response plan is communications. Is this required anywhere, and is anyone doing this well? Sounds like this next question would be a good follow-up. Why not make municipalities legally responsible to organize all its neighbors to be able to handle emergencies? If not this way, is there another type of infrastructure to institutionalize this neighborhood responsibility so that the public benefits? You have two questions to choose from.
Well, we being New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, with help from the Climate Adaptation Alliance, workers, and a lot of our member groups, we held a Sandy roundtable 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we have 75 people. And one of the things that was said was that there was a lack of communication. I guess your first question is communication was lacking. And I think to your second question, I think municipalities certainly need to get involved, but I think also we need to look at local community groups and people on the ground already working with people and give those people resources and get them involved in the process. So you have the voice coming from the communities and get them involved in the process and let them do a large part, or at least have the resource to organize.
I'm going to go against the Occupy Sandy way and say that our government in Keansburg and as a municipality, we came together prior to Sandy. We were at our firehouse at 1:30 in the afternoon being told by the borough administrator, and I quote him, to get the hell out. And we stayed. All of us are volunteers on the fire department, EMS, and we stayed there evacuating for 3 solid days. I had water up to my chin at some points. And I've been asked probably about 3 dozen times, would I do it again? And the answer is yes. It's a job I'm trained to do, and that's what I'm there to do it. Whether it's nothing, whenever you call 911, it's not for a good reason. So that doesn't change because of climate change or because of a hurricane. And we did have a good command system. We did pull together. We had 2 different fire departments on 2 different ends of the town, but when it came down to doing the job, they were there to do it. And I think that that's really important to at least give them a little bit of kudos. One of the things that we find hard is to remember what we did last week. But if you ask me what I did a year ago at 1:30 p.m., I can tell you. And that's pretty powerful to understand exactly what happened and what goes on. A lot of the municipalities do have their own setup to how they handle a disaster. But we've also never dealt with a disaster of this size or this kind. So it's kind of like that goes in that whole planning phase. Can't plan for something you don't know or you've never experienced. I couldn't tell you how to handle a volcano. Can any of you?
And your comments sort of reinforce it. So much of it's local. I mean, there is some level for coordinating between towns, and really that's, I think, a good job for the counties. And it makes sense they're doing those plans. But
so the question is, and maybe this goes against kind of what I was saying, that I want community organizations to be empowered. But at the same time, who does hold, and have to work with municipalities, but at the same time, we do have to find a way to hold municipalities accountable. And I'm not sure if the state does that, because at times we've met with state officials and they say, oh, we got to go to the municipalities.
Your Office of Emergency Management handles
but we do have to find a way of holding municipalities accountable and making sure they're working with local organizations.
And Pete, as part of hazard mitigation planning, it is a requirement to get public input. So you at least have to go through the mechanism of posting it in the paper and having public meetings, having ways for people to give you feedback. But I was just having this conversation with my colleague Martha driving up here. Ocean County is going through that process right now. And they had 2 people show up to the public comment input session. And I just, there's so much going on for people right now, just all the time. People's lives are so busy. And at the end of the day, people still think hazard mitigation planning is about the police or the fire department doing their job, and they don't see where their role in that is. And so I think that's where some changes could be made. And we're all kind of talking about that.
Can I just say amen?
Well, there's a great question that relates to that, is how should people in this room get involved in hazard mitigation? mitigation plan.
Let somebody else.
You did that.
I didn't do that.
Well, this one quick thing is the state's working on its hazard mitigation plan right now, and it's not clear if there's going to be an opportunity for public comment on the draft plan. In New York, our sort of partner in Sandy Recovery, their plan was posted on the web and you could submit comments electronically. So you could email the governor's office and I'd be happy to provide you with contact information asking for that opportunity. I think that there's grants going out to counties now to update their plans, and I have a list of the 14 counties that will be getting these grants. I don't know who's gotten them yet or not, that's also not public information, but we need to get the word out so you know that there's something to participate in, which I think is partly what you're speaking to. People aren't hearing. There's a way more thinking they have a goal.
Well, and I think that's why you have to get the community organizations involved. Posting a plan on the website is not outreach. Like I said though, I mean, we feel you on that. You know, we were organized for 3 weeks and we'll get more than 2 people, but not the crowd that we hope. So it's really difficult for everybody. But I think that's why, you know, to have some, you know, more success, go to the folks that are quicker on the ground and get the help and empower them to do it. And I'm not saying put all the responsibility on them, but I am saying work hand in hand with those groups.
And I think there's a lot of attention on hazard mitigation planning right now, which is important. It's an important thing, but it's not the only mechanism within municipalities to do some of this planning. Like the municipal master plan is a really critical part of municipal planning, and that can use a great infusion of cross-fertilization as well. So although it's a sort of an important thing right now, especially post-storm, because so many counties are going through it, there's other mechanisms too that we really need attention as well.
Yeah, and everybody should feel free to contact their local planning department and their county planning department and ask what is the status of our hazard mitigation plan. They should know.
We're going to wrap up with this last 2-part question, so you can answer the questions, or you can use this minute to give your parting thoughts. It's a good question, or a good combination. How can we plan when so many people and leaders and government officials don't believe in climate change or sea level rise? And then the follow-up to that is this whole discussion is predicated on the notion that proper long-range planning is not happening right now in New Jersey. So who's falling down on the job? And there's a list here. The state, the feds, the president, HUD, FEMA, who needs to drive the process?
I can start with that. I think we can work our way down. I think you know, the state government hasn't completely been recognizing the threats of climate change and sea level rise yet, but it hasn't stopped any of us from talking about it. So there's still tons of groups that are doing work around this issue. So although I agree state leadership would help, we're still all working on these issues, and eventually it's going to catch on. And at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be about what numbers on the graph or what mark we're at what year. It's about life safety at the end. Like, people are losing their lives because we're not paying attention to these issues, and that's only going to get worse. So at the end, it doesn't have to be about believing in climate change or what sea level rise rate we're going to be at. It's about making sure people are safe.
Yes, and so I would contact my local officials and say, I'm worried if I was living in a coastal community or a place that was vulnerable to flooding, I'm worried about being safe. And if I wasn't, I might contact my elected assembly person or senator and say, I'm worried about paying for all these people that aren't going to be safe. I think that, I think Governor Whitman said this morning that elected officials respond to their constituents, and so, you know, we all need to be vocal. As far as just one quick tiny piece of sort of good news is that HUD released a press announcement yesterday saying that their second tranche of funding was going to require the states to do a risk assessment that looked at climate impacts and to use that risk assessment to direct infrastructure dollars going forward. Now, what that really means and how they enforce it and what the state does in response is an open question, but it's a step in the right direction. So we are seeing leadership from the federal government and a real opportunity for our state to step up and match that.
I think the conversation starts with every single one of us. I think it's about education and awareness and knowing what's out there and what's going on. and starting a forum and educating those who don't know about it, and going to local governments, state governments, county governments, and telling them how you feel and what's going on with it. It starts with us as individuals and goes to a big, larger group.
You know, I hate to put blame on any one sector. I think people trying to respond to emergency that was, we say, catastrophic proportions. I think now that we've had a year to think about it, though, I think that the federal government has to hold the state government accountable, and I think the state government has to hold municipalities accountable. And I think there has to be, and I think also in this, I'm not going to let anybody off the hook. I think the foundations, the NGO community, and I'm talking about it from an environmental justice perspective now. I think all of these groups have to make more space for the conversation around justice and equity and race and income, which in the country we generally do not like to talk about anyway. And so, the primary responsibility, I think, has to be in all 4 of those groups who have some resources. I know you don't, Pete, I know you look at me like, I don't have resources. So, but, it's all relative. Have more resources in the community we're talking about, have more resources in the environmental justice community, and they all have to make space for this question and pay attention to it and make it a priority.
All right, well, thank you all for those great comments and insights, and thank you.